Let's get started for the agenda today. A quick review of what we did yesterday. So we basically looked at the the fundamentals of vulnerability management. Since most of you are working within vulnerability management domain, you already are aware of it. And we all were on the same page that vulnerability is nothing but a misconfiguration, weakness, partial configuration, or any gap in the configuration that basically leads to exploitation. And when that vulnerability is exploited, it may result in security breaches, security incidents that will have impact on business. It either disrupt the business, it either uh, results in data theft, it may result in reputational damage, sanctions or penalties from the regulatory authorities. There could be n number of replications when vulnerabilities are exploited, when it results in security breach. That's what we basically discussed. So we basically looked at overview of vulnerability management. We looked at importance of vulnerability management, different types of vulnerabilities we talked about, and probably some vulnerabilities that you have not looked into or you currently don't look into in your current role and responsibilities, which could be related to hardware and IoT vulnerabilities, which could be related to human-related vulnerabilities, which is social engineering, insufficient training, weak password practices. So when it comes to social engineering vulnerability, we basically have uh, a dedicated team members whose job is to look for vulnerabilities across employees. So they randomly pick employees, they randomly look, discover their social media presence, and see what kind of information they are sharing on social media. Are they putting any business specific information? All that they basically look for. Insufficient training, that's also a vulnerability. Weak password practices is a vulnerability. And I gave you an example of a strong password policy, and then I told you that how it it is a weak password at the same time. We looked at examples of vulnerabilities. All of these are vulnerabilities example, and then we understood the importance of vulnerability management. We looked at cyber exposure life cycle. So this is what we completed in the previous session on Friday. We'll move on with the topics that we need to complete today. So now that you all have MFA set up, we are going to start building the lab environment. We will build lab environment both in Microsoft Azure as well as in AWS so that you will understand the vulnerability management value proposition that it brings on the table. You have already been managing assets from various on-premises data centers or hybrid locations. This training is an opportunity to look at cloud side of the world also, and you will get to know whether assets differ in configuration, differ in how they are presented or how they work in cloud, or is it the same process? After you connect to an asset, inside OS, it is the same OS, and from outside, what difference it brings, that's what you will understand. So till this point, we completed the training. Then we will look at overview of Tenable Vulnerability Management. So let's log into your respective Tenable Vulnerability Management. Great, let's get started. Let's do a quick overview of Tenable UI and all the options which are available in the UI. We'll just take a quick walkthrough of it, and then we will get into the lab environment building exercise that we need to complete today so that we can start with the deployment of Tenable components on our lab environment assets, and we can start to scan for vulnerability management. So this is the UI that we all see when we log in for the first time. Now, since this is a Tenable trial license of Tenable, wherein we requested the trial for vulnerability management. However, we did receive trial for web app scanning and Lumin, which is a new product of Tenable, which is more about I would say, which is more about analysis and prioritization. So we have got access to these three products. They also claim that they provided us access to Tenable Cloud Security. However, I do not see that UI in this window. I'm saying I do not see that product listing in this UI. So probably this could be a miscommunication, or that's how the email is drafted, and they've stopped providing Tenable Cloud Security trial as part of Tenable Vulnerability Management. So this is what we see. Now, what we will be doing every time we log into Tenable, we will always select vulnerability management module so that it takes us to the vulnerability management module. So that's how you will look at vulnerability management module of Tenable. Now, on this vulnerability management module, you see a default dashboard, which is in front of you. This is a default dashboard. You can always customize this dashboard. You can create a dashboard of your choice by highlighting what you want to see on day-to-day basis. So that option is available. Right now, what we are looking at is the is the default dashboard, which basically provides you certain information. On the top, it says cyber exposure newsfeed. So this is cyber threat intelligence that Tenable that is powered by Tenable, wherein you are receiving some information about cyber exposure newsfeed. So this information is very dynamic. It keeps on changing. It basically shows you most critical, most important, most widely uh, and most universal vulnerabilities. So example, it says that there's a common vulnerability exploit database which says frequently asked questions about 40 jump 0 day in 40 manager and 40 manager cloud. So 40 manager is a product line. It's an ISV. There was a vulnerability which was recently discovered last month in this product. So it basically talks about FAQs of that vulnerability. Similarly, from bugs to breaches, 25 significant CVEs and Mitre CVE turns 26. So you see some, some sort of notifications here that will continue to change all the time. It doesn't mean that it will change very frequently, that in next moment you will see something else. This is all managed by Tenable in the backend, so we have no control on this. Then comes vulnerability management overview. This shows you vulnerability priority rating, vulnerability age, then critical and high exploitable vulnerabilities, feature threat list. So you see all of this information here. And as I said, you can always change this UI. Now, what you will be working with most of the time over here, you have some quick actions also. So you see these three vertical lines. When you click on these three vertical lines, it opens a drop down and it basically expands these icons. So these are icons. When you look at these icons, you will probably not be able to figure out what this icon is all about or what does this icon mean, because they are not universal icon. They are basically unique to Tenable. So always click on these three horizontal lines so that you will see the name against the icon and you will know, oh, this is the module related to assets. This is my scanner module. This is my reports module. This is my export module. So you will always need to click on that. Now, the more comfort level you will get with this solution, see, the core concepts will remain the same. Most of you have come from vulnerability management background. You continue to work with vulnerability management solutions like Tenable, Qualys, Rapid7, Nessus, Microsoft Defender for cloud vulnerability management module. So you are already aware of the concept. What you are not aware is the dashboard of Tenable. Now, this dashboard of Tenable is new to you because you're looking at this dashboard for the first time. So if you really want to get efficient outcome of this product, you will need to understand the UI. You will need to understand all the capabilities which are available on the UI and how do you make use of those capabilities to the best of your capabilities and to the best of your business requirements and objective. That's the ultimate goal of this training. So we'll start from the top. So these are three horizontal lines that basically expands the capability which are available. Most of the time, you will be working with one of these capabilities. Then comes Tenable Vulnerability Management. You are anywhere on the solution, whichever page you are on. If you just click on Tenable, it will bring you to the home page or to the dashboard. So that's Tenable. When you click on Vulnerability Management or Tenable, it does the same thing. Then it shows you the current module that you are in. Right now, you are on Vulnerability Management module, right? We go to the right, we see quick action here. In quick action, you can add a new dashboard, create a vulnerability management scan. VM stands for vulnerability management, not virtual machine. View all vulnerability management scans. view all vulnerability findings, add a recast rule. So some options are available actually. Then we move to the right, we see the question mark, which is our resource center. Through here, we can look for Tenable help. We can look for announcements, product updates, onboarding guides, and best practices. Information is also available. Then you see this notification while you are performing an activity. When you execute some sort of action, it will basically show you the result of it in the notification, whether that action is successful, whether that action failed, whether there was an issue with that action. Then comes the setting sign, the wheel sign, which takes you to the settings. It takes you to this UI. I will explain this UI also, but before I start with this UI, either you click on this wheel sign. So for example, you are on the home page. This is the home page. You click on this wheel sign, it takes you to the settings blade, the settings dashboard. Whether you call it settings blade, settings dashboard is one and the same thing. And you see all the settings. Or the other way is you click on these three dots, three horizontal lines. At the bottom, you see settings. It is the same place. So now I'm back on the home page. I'll click on these three horizontal lines and I'll click on settings. It takes me to the settings blade once again. So when you need to go to settings, when you need to work as an admin and configure or modify certain configurations, you will always click on settings. It will take you to the settings page. At any point in time you have any questions, please raise your hands. I'm using two screens. On one screen, I have participants view, so I can always see that some participant is raising hands, probably needs some clarification or have some questions. Then comes your name, the name with which you're signed in. For example, I'm currently using Shruti's account. So I'm signed in using Shruti's account. You all have your respective account with which you're signed in. You can click on my profile. It basically shows you your profile. You can make changes if required. It shows you your full name, your email address, your role, current role. We'll talk about what roles are. Your passwords. If you want to change your password, you can also change your password. And you can also enable two-factor authentication. Now, as we have enabled two-factor authentication in AWS, because it was a mandatory requirement. However, two-factor authentication is like wearing helmet while you are driving a motorbike or using seat belt while you're driving a motor car. It is for your own safety, for the safety of your own account. There are regulations, there are compulsions from the local law enforcement agencies at times. It is also an offense under Motor Vehicle Act. But at the same time, if you don't use two-factor authentication, nobody is stopping you. However, the chances are more that your account may get compromised, and this is also a vulnerability. Now, it will not be, it will not be discovered as a vulnerability in Tenable if an identity is not using two-factor authentication. Tenable will not term it as a vulnerability. This is more of a misconfiguration which can be exploited. It is also a vulnerability because any misconfiguration is a vulnerability. So what you need to do, you can enable SMS two-factor authentication, or you can enable Authenticator app. Both you can do. You already have seen how Authenticator app works. So all you need to do, just click on Enable Authenticator app. You need to type, enable the, enter current password to request TOPT token. Whatever your current password is, you type that password and then you will request the token and you can configure the two-factor authentication. So I leave that decision to you whether you want to do it or not. The reason I'm not forcing it on you because it's a trial environment. Once this training is over, any which ways you will lose access to it. So the agenda or the objective is to understand the configuration and the specific, portion of the UI where that configuration exists, so that you can probably suggest that configuration in your customer environment, or you can have it configured in your customer environment depending on your role there. Is everyone with me so far?
Yes.
Great. So this was about the Tenable UI. I'm saying the top blade. wherein you see all the information. I'll click on Tenable once again. That will take me to the home page. Now, while I'm in my account over here, even if I click on Tenable icon, it doesn't make any difference. It will not take me to the home page. I will need to click on cancel. That's the only exception. If I click on if I click on Tenable icon, it will always take me to the home page. Okay. Then let me refresh my screen. This is going in the loop. All right. Now, the other option is whenever you are in the settings, settings are common for most of the Tenable products. So while you are in the settings, you will not be able to navigate back to, navigate back to the dashboard. For that, you will need to select your product. So workspace is nothing but this is like a tenant or a cloud account that has been given to you, because what you're connected to right now is the Tenable instance in cloud. So it's like Tenable is providing you a browser-based UI, which is nothing but a SaaS, software as a service solution from Tenable, wherein Tenable is using its underlying infrastructure, providing all the capabilities to you, and you don't need to bother to install it and manage it yourself. So you will need to click on this cube or whatever you call it, and click on vulnerability management. It will take you back to the vulnerability management module. So we are back on the vulnerability management module. So we have gone through all the options. If you want to switch to other modules, you just need to click on these dots over here, right next to your name, and you can select the other modules that you have access to. For example, right now we have access to these three modules. If I click on workspace, it will show me this page wherein I see all the modules that I have access to or that are enabled for my account. So that's about the UI. Let's move on. We are back on the home page. Now we will look at all of these options which are available. By clicking on those three horizontal lines, we look at all the options. Not today. We will look at these options as and when the right time comes to configure those options, we'll come to those options. So for example, we have assets, findings, solutions, scans, sensor, reports, export, remediation, and settings. These are all the options. Now, as an admin, imagine you are deploying vulnerability management solution, Tenable vulnerability management solution for your customer. So while you're deploying the solution, there are a couple of things that you will need to design and architect as a prerequisites at the very beginning, which is you will need to understand lay of the landscape, which means who your customer is. It's, whether your customer has presence in one geography, restricted to one country or one city, whether your customer is a global customer, which has presence across multiple geographies in multiple countries in multiple continents, across multiple continents. Accordingly, you will need to design the solution, because at the end of the day, this solution is going to capture, this solution is going to store data from your assets. That data may contain PHI and PII also, personally identifiable information, but protected health information. So you need to design the solution according to the regulations, compliances that your business needs to adhere to. It should not happen that you bring this vulnerability management in place to identify vulnerabilities and things are really smooth, but at the end of the day, your data is getting stored outside of your geographical boundary, which is violating the compliance. Then it's a huge risk. So it is very important that you understand the design and architecture aspect of it, since it's a cloud-based solution. So by default, if you are not providing the specific location, Tenable is storing the data in North America. So when we click on settings, we see this information here. which is under general. So let's look at the general settings and then we will get started. So it says severity. It says the severity selection will dictate which CVS version shall be displayed and the default in the user vulnerability management dashboard where a CVS's value is shown. So this is the version 2 and version 3. By default, it uses version 2. You can also configure version 3. I'll talk about that later. Then comes service level agreement. This is your service level agreement with Tenable. It says set your vulnerability age SLA for each severity and other matrices to use for calculating S. So with this, you can calculate SLAs, which means any vulnerability age SLA. Severity, any vulnerability that is more than 7 days old is critical vulnerability, high vulnerability, 30, low. So you can see all the vulnerabilities here. You can change this settings because at the end of the day, when it shows the vulnerability criticality, in the dashboard, you will see the criticality of the vulnerability or the severity of the vulnerability that will be based on this age. So you can change this setting here. Override vulnerability severity metric, vulnerability age matrix, first seen or published date. First seen basically means when did you see that vulnerability for the first time in your asset? That's vulnerability age metric. The other option is published date, which means when that vulnerability was first reported by Tenable. Yes, Abhijit.
What is this VPR?
This vulnerability priority rating. It's the rating for the vulnerability. You will see, when we go back to the portal, you will see those configurations. Okay. Next, language. Which language you want the information. So by default, it says the plugin details language selection will change the display language for all the plugin details. By default, it uses the language. I'm saying by default, it uses English. However, you can change the details here also. So it has Japanese and it has Chinese also. So we are using English USA as the default plugin. However, you can also change it to Japanese and simplified Chinese. The moment you do that, the portal will change. Next, export. It says select the default expiration for any export created in the platform. Users can change the expiration when they create the export. Now, when you export something from the platform, it is stored in the export data as export data. So after how many days you want that data to be deleted? Or default expiration for any export. So that's 2 days. The reason we don't keep much data there because it will basically impact the performance of the software. So by default, it is 2 days. It says the maximum allowed expiration is 30 days and it is set on organization's account. So if I keep it 30 days, that's the maximum time. Any data that I export will be available in the portal that I can reuse. I can export it once again or download it. I'm saying that's what it basically means. They keep it 2 days intentionally because when you export data and if it remains for a longer duration, it will unnecessarily occupy space. That will affect your account performance. So that's the reason they're keeping it 2 days. In a production environment, we keep it for 7 days, which is a healthy, export duration or healthy export data retention period. But you can make it up to 30 days. Minimum is 1 day. You can see, obviously, you can't keep it 0. It will give you an error. So it says the minimum is 1 and maximum is 30. If you keep it 31, then it will give you an error. So I'm keeping it 7. Then search. You can search for plugins here. Over here, we'll talk about that later. And email allow list. These are the email domains. So it says enter comma separated email domains where the system can send exports. So these are the email domains where you can send the export data. By default, it will use the email domain with which you are signed in, which is virtueversity.com. However, if you want the export data to be shown to other email domains while you are running a vulnerability scan, you have an option to notify uh, users via email as well as text message. Then you will need to provide the domains here. So if you provide a domain, it would basically whitelist that domain and Tenable would happily send notifications or emails to that domain, right? So that's the domain part. So you can probably include all the domains that you use in your company or all the subdomains also. You can do that. So that's the general settings for Tenable. Any question on these general settings?
Hold on.
Yes, Amit. Okay, great. Let's move on. So we are done with the general settings. Then comes SAML. SAML stands for Security Assertion Markup Language. It's a protocol. There are multiple protocols that we use for single sign-on. So we have protocols like OpenID Connect, OAuth 2.0, SAML 2.0, federated protocol. There are multiple authentication protocols. Imagine a situation where when you want Tenable, you don't want employees to log into Tenable by typing their credentials. You would rather want a single sign-on to be configured with Tenable so that your employees can directly, I'm saying, when your employees log into the laptop or the corporate device, they can just double click, they can just type the Tenable UI, and then it will directly log them in. It would not ask them for credentials. That is where you can configure the single sign-on with your identity service provider. So what will happen? Your identity service provider, let's say we are using AWS or Microsoft Azure. So Microsoft Azure has Entra ID. That Entra ID is an identity provider. Uh, so we'll not get into the details of it because this is outside of scope, but still I would give you a fair idea of what this is. So this is Microsoft Entra ID. Let's imagine that Entra ID is my. So you guys are using Okta. Using Okta, you can also configure single sign-on with Tenable, which basically means Okta will act as an identity provider and Tenable will act as a service provider. So whenever a user will try to log into Tenable, Tenable will send that request to Okta, asking Okta if this is a legitimate user. Okta will confirm that yes, it's a legitimate user, and Tenable will allow that user to log in. Tenable will basically provide a session cookie to the user so that user can log into Tenable console as long as user is not deleting that cookie from the browser. And when that user refreshes the browser, deletes the browser history, then user needs to log into Tenable once again. That's known as single sign-on. Now, since I don't have access to Okta, I have access to cloud basically. So this is where you configure single sign-on. So basically in Azure, you navigate to enterprise applications. And here you can click on new application. And here you can search for Tenable. You can see Tenable is WE for Tenable, enable, airbag, W client, or Nessus. No, so it's not an application you need to create. So even if you don't see Tenable here, you can create your own application and you can configure the single sign-on. For example, you can see here I have configured the single sign-on with LinkedIn, which means I never log into LinkedIn I never need to provide credentials to log into LinkedIn. Either I log into LinkedIn using my Gmail federation or with my Azure federation. Similarly, I have done federation single sign-on for AWS, for Google Cloud. So I've created single sign-on accounts here, which means whenever any user in this directory, for example, this directory has a total of 136 users. These users can log into those applications like LinkedIn, AWS, GCP without even providing the credentials. They will just provide the credentials once and then they can log into any application that has been published to them. That's what single sign-on with, with SAML authentication, SAML 2.0 authentication. So we were here, SAML. So as I said, you can create a SAML configuration here. You can import the XML or you can provide the manual entry. This is where, So any service provider that you would like to configure SAML with, you just need to provide the description. I'm saying you just need to type it yourself, and then you need to provide the IDP entity, which is identity provider. If you want to configure it with Okta, you need to provide the IDP identity, IDP URL, and certificate. So this information you need to provide here. And with that information, it will generate the URL that you will put into Okta. So any user who is using Okta for single sign-on, they can authenticate to Okta once and they can log into Tenable also. That's the concept of single sign-on. Is everyone with me on this? Yeah. Okay. So that single sign-on, obviously we don't have access to Okta, so we'll not configure single sign-on. I just wanted to have you understand that if you ever want to configure single sign-on, please come to this blade and have your identity provider information available that you will need to put here. This will provide you some information, which is login ID that you will need to put at the other side. So that's on the SAML part.
Like we can we try? We have a Okta.
You want to you have Okta, but you are not Okta admin. Do you have this information from Okta?
No,
You are
actually, we have
you
to
need
create
to
them.
configure. No. See, Okta will provide XML. This is how it is. Okay. I'll show you how this is done from where I have access to so that you will understand the process. What are we
Mhm.
talking about? So let's say if I go to Entra, if I go to applications, for example, I have single sign-on configured with AWS. This is what you basically need. So for configuring single sign-on, you need to have admin level access to the application single sign-on over here. So this is what you need basically. You need this configuration, which is the other side of Okta. For example, I have configured single sign-on between Azure and AWS. So what is happening in Azure? In Azure, I'm typing the configuration of the other side, which is AWS side. So I've typed the identifier ID, reply URL, right? And then similarly, on the AWS side, I will need to type this information. This login URL, Microsoft Entra identifier, logout URL. So this information will get generated when I provide the other side information. So when I provide this information, it will automatically generate the thumbprint, certificate thumbprint, and the URL that I will take to the other side and configure it. So it's a two-way configuration, and for that you need to be an admin of both the tools to configure the single sign-on. As an end user, you can't do that. Make
Oh,
sense?
yeah.
Okay. Let's move on. That's the reason it says import XML. This is the best method of doing it. You just need to download the XML and import it here. That will have all the configuration. Or you can manually type all of this configuration like IDP URL, certificate information, all that. So that's how you configure it. Now, since you are into admin login, you are logged in as an administrator. That's the reason you're able to see. But in a production environment, you will hardly have admin access. They will provide you other RBACs, other role-based access control that I will talk about when we reach to that level. Next. So we'll go back to the settings once again. Then comes license. Now this is very important. As I repeat once again, since you are logged in as an admin, you're able to see all of these options. Once you log in as a normal user, as a L1, L2, L3 user, we'll have that bifurcation. Then you will not have access to all of these capabilities. Then you will have access to limited capabilities. So right now you can see the license that I have. These are the licenses that I have. So right now I'm using an evaluation license here, which is valid till November 19th. And in this evaluation license, I have certain restrictions. Obviously, web app scanning is 0% used. I'm not using web app scanning at the moment. And this is the location where my data is getting stored. So my location, my site, I'm saying they have done the bifurcation probably in US, they have multiple sites. So in US site 3A, which is in US West, which means California, Washington, that side it is. So US West in that side, and this is the VM plugin set. This is nothing but the vulnerability database that it has, and the VM plugin activated on November 11th at 9:16 a.m. UST. So this is the place. Now, if you feel that you don't want your data to be placed here, because you will have vulnerability data coming from assets which are in Europe, then you have two options. You can request Tenable to have your storage or your data center switch to one of the data centers in Europe. That's one option. Second, you can get a separate Tenable account which will only host assets which are in Europe. Both options are there. But as an admin, you need to be aware of this critical configuration, which is data residency and localization. You should not, most of the people don't understand it, and that's where they fail. So this is the current location where your data is getting stored. Okay, we'll go back to the settings once again. Okay, so we're done with the license. Next is access control. Now, before we get started with access control, so we'll spend 15-20 more minutes here with some additional options that you need to know from day one. And then we will start with the lab configuration as and when we have a specific configuration available for which these capabilities can be used. We'll come to these capabilities. But by the end of this training, you would have gone through all of these capabilities. The next module is access control. Now, this is very important module from admin perspective, because with this module, an administrator can configure access, or can basically configure the control who will have access to Tenable, at what level that access will be available. For example, let's say in your vulnerability management team, you have multiple employees. Some employees are primarily tasked with logging to the dashboard, look for vulnerabilities, those were discovered by scans, schedule scans. So they navigate to schedule scan, they download the reports, and then they export the reports, and then they send it to the appropriate team. That's what they do. Some employees are tasked with look into those vulnerabilities, identify where the misconfiguration lies, what that vulnerability is all about, investigate that vulnerability, and probably create a remediation plan and send it to someone else, a higher person in hierarchy, probably a level 3 person. Then there's a level 3 person who will have access who will have access to the reports, who will have access to the investigation, and who is also have access to the remediation control. So admin can also, I'm saying the level 3 can also remediate the vulnerabilities. Similarly, if your company has multiple locations and Tenable is a centralized vulnerability management solution, and you want employees to have access to the assets or host which relates to their geography as part of compliance. So let's say you're using Tenable for managing vulnerabilities of your host in India, host in North America, host in Europe. Give me a moment. All right, so the other use case that I was talking about, that let's imagine a scenario wherein your company has Tenable as centralized vulnerability management solution, and you have assets onboarded into Tenable from different locations. You have assets from India, you have assets from America, you have assets from Europe, you have assets from Australia. And you have an extended vulnerability management team in each country. So there is a team in US, there is a team in India, there's a team in Australia, there's a team in Europe. And you want the regional team to manage the vulnerabilities of those assets, regional assets. This is the arrangement that you want, access control. So, or there is a scan which is running and you want limited people to have access to that scan, access control. Anything related to access management, anything related to the capabilities and components which are available in Tenable, related to the access to those capabilities and components, access control is your single point of reference. So under access control, you will see everything. So this module is very important from configuration perspective, from compliance perspective. As I said, it should not happen that you are able to remediate all the vulnerabilities in your environment and your identity, they themselves are misconfigured, and that is nothing but another vulnerability that you are not aware of. So access control is very important. Access control shows you all the roles which are available in Tenable. So directly navigate to the roles. Here you see all the roles. These are the roles in Tenable. Uh, these are 5 default roles which are available in Tenable. We have administrator as the top level role, which is the super admin role, you would say, which has access to all the capabilities in a Tenable product. Whether it's Tenable Vulnerability Management, whether it's Tenable Security Center, whether it's any Tenable product, administrator is the super admin who has access to all the modules of it. So right next to a role, you see an option that says action. You can export that role, and it basically shows you configuration of that role. If you want to see the configuration of that role, this is the configuration that you can see. You can see the schedule, all that information you can see here. So these are the roles: administrator, basic user, scan manager, scan operator, and standard user. These are the 5 roles in Tenable. Now, if you feel that these roles are not sufficient, you need a combination of role. You probably need a role. So scan manager is, let's say scan manager is one role which has the capability to run a vulnerability scan using host, using scanners. And it can, after the vulnerability scan is complete, it can export the report also that scan manager does. And then you have administrator who has complete access. You need a capability which falls in between administrator and scan manager, a custom role. You don't want a complete admin, and you don't need only scan manager. You need more capabilities. In that case, you can click on add role. You can create a custom role also. This is how you can create a custom role. So for example, I create a custom role, which is, let's say, sample role. I can provide a description of it, and I can say this is my custom role. And then since this is a custom role, by default, I'm giving this role read access to the assets, all the assets, findings, and then my account. Obviously, this role needs to log into the account, but then manage. Do you want this role to have manage capabilities? You can decide. Do you want this role to have activity log read capabilities? Activity log basically means what all activities are being performed in Tenable console by all the users. It's more of an administrative feature, because with that feature you will always know who is doing what. What if somebody deletes an asset? What if somebody unnecessarily changes the configuration? You will all see that capability here. Then license information. Do you want this role to have access to license information? Do you want this role to have access, read access, or manage access? The moment you select manage, then the person becomes administrator. Then what is the point of creating this role? It says the access control manage privilege grants administrator privilege to the user. So you need to be very careful. So you can probably grant read access, and then general settings on the portal. The general settings which are there, you want read access or manage access on these settings. The moment, so this this checkbox is very critical. That's the reason you see a bang here also. Rest of the checkbox is okay. So this is how you create a custom role, right? So you provide all of this information, and then you go to the next, which is Tenable Vulnerability Management, sensor custom role, web app scanning role, numeral role, because these are all the capabilities that you have available. So this is how we create a custom role in a scenario wherein the existing roles are not sufficient. and we have certain custom requirements to satisfy. Are you with me so far on this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Great. So this is about role. Now, when you create a role, you also have permissions here, right? So you also have permissions. Now, those permissions are, now this is something that we will come back later once we have some assets identified. Remember the use case that I talked about, that I have a centralized vulnerability management solution for my entire company, and the assets are coming from different business units, different application environments, which are production, non-production, staging, testing, from different locations, which are North America, Europe, India, Asia Pacific, Australia, and I want my users to be tagged or to have specific capabilities. That's where this portion comes into the picture. So we'll come back to this portion when the right time comes. Then comes group. You can also create a group and you can group users in that group. So for example, I can create a group of users for let's say we can create groups based on uh, multiple logic. I can create a group like L1, L2, L3 group. So all my L1 users will have a specific role assigned to them. L2 users probably will have a higher role assigned to them. My L3 users will be subject matter experts. So I can create a group on this mode like this. I can create a group name, let's say SOC or VM vulnerability management level 1. Managed by SAML basically means that the single sign-on will be enabled. And then I can select users who will be part of that group. And later on, I can assign permissions to the group, permissions and role to the group. That's the logic of group. So since I don't have users, I only have one user, which is my admin user with which I'm logged in. So I can't create groups here. And then comes users. The reason I started from the back, because that's how you would understood the capability. So now I'm creating a user. So what I have done, I have created a user for you in someone else's tenant. So what we did, we used multiple Virtue University employees corporate email addresses to request for trial, and then we also used our sister concern companies like CBG Global and others to request for trial. When we requested from, let's say, 20 to 30 IDs, we got trial approved on 10 IDs or 11 IDs that we needed. That was the reason I did not provide you access on Friday. I provided you access today because I wanted to see if there was any update from Friday till today. Probably some more participants would have got the access. So now we'll create a user. I'll show you how do we create a user and how do we configure the access for that user. So for example, I'm creating a user and I want that user to have basic capabilities. I'm saying, let's say level 1 user. So I'm creating a user, SOC username I would need to type because level 1 would be more of a group name. So I can create a user, let's say Amit.Kumar. A username should not have dot, obviously, Amit Kumar, and then the user name. This is the full name, then the username. Username, I can say Amit.Kumar at. Now, after at, I cannot say dxe.com. It will fail if I say dxe.com. It is not giving me an error right now. It will fail when I go to the end. So I'll show you that it will fail. So I'll say Amit.Kumar at dxe.com as username. And then email is obviously username and email is the same. I'll put the password. I'll select the role for the user is basic user. And then for the authentication, I'll say don't use API keys. API keys basically means that you can also communicate with Tenable through external applications. You can integrate Tenable with your SOC, with your SIEM solutions like Sentinel. And from Sentinel, you can communicate with Tenable. So it says control whether a user is able to authenticate using API keys. SAML, I'm disabling it for the user. And two-factor authentication, I'm also disabling. I'm only enabling username and password at this moment for this user so that user can sign in, right? So I've provided all the information. It says that the password is basically good, not strong. So I'll put a strong password. I'll put the same password, which I put for you guys. Tenable at 2024. How come this be a strong password? Tenable is playing smart with me here. Okay, so I've provided all these capabilities. Then next, over here, I can select my user group. So I can select my user group that I have created. Whatever user group I've created, I can select it. And this user will become part of that group. Then comes permissions. In the permissions, over here, I can select permissions. So for example, this is the basic user, and I want this user to have access to certain group of assets, maybe group of assets belonging to a specific business unit, or group of assets that belongs to a specific geography, or group of assets that belong to the production environment. That is where I can, select the permissions. Now, where exactly these permissions are coming from? They're coming from tags. So we have another concept of tagging that we use in Tenable. So we tag resource. We create a tag and then we tag that resource. Every resource we create a tag for a resource so that you can select the permission. So right now I'm not selecting any permissions. I'm just showing you that how we create a user, right? Now over here you can see some tags I've already created, which is, for example, business unit, cloud operations. And this business unit cloud operations have owner permission. So if I select this permission for this user, the user that I'm creating, Amit would have owner permission on cloud operations business unit, which basically have all assets tagged to it. Or if I select this tag, which is cloud DC owner permission, then Amit would have owner permission on this tag. So right now, don't get confused. As I said, you will have a scenario wherein one user would need access to specific assets, which are part of specific group, which are part of specific geographies, which are part of specific application environment. And to denote that, we create permission sets here. So when you create permission sets, you will understand. So this is how we create a user. I'm not creating that user. However, I would request you to create one user and log in with that user and see for yourself how the difference in UI will be. When you log in with the basic user, you will notice that the user will not have access to all the capabilities that you currently have because you are logged in as an admin. Are you with me on this?
Yeah.
Great. So that's about the access control part, which is very important. What is important here is roles, that these are the roles. I can create additional roles, permissions that I will be able to create once I will have enough assets onboarded into my Tenable Vulnerability Management dashboard, and then group users, and then groups. So you can group users also. So this is what we create: users, group, permissions, roles, and API access security. If you're using APIs and if you want to whitelist certain APIs, for example, if Tenable is accepting, if you use a third-party application to send instructions to Tenable, or if you're sending data from other applications to Tenable, or if you're sending Tenable activity log data from Tenable to Splunk, QRadar, Sentinel, in that case, you will need to configure the APIs here, wherein you will need to provide the IP addresses of the destinations in source. So that's API access security part. So this is about access control, which is very important, module from the administrator perspective or from access perspective. So we are done with access control. This is equally important module from administrator perspective, activity logs. Any minute operations or activities that you're doing in the portal, how many times you're logging in, what are you doing? I'm saying you are navigating from one view to another. Obviously, that will not get recorded. But if you have created a user, you've created a group, you have modified the permissions, you have you have done some configuration changes, all that will be logged here. It will log each and every aspect of it. Everything will get logged here. You can see the logs here. The last log was 813, which says audit, connection connector event. And when you click on a log, it will give you the details of that log also, if you want to see the details of that log. So audit log view should see all the activities that I'm doing. You will see user updates. I was updating users, session create, connector event, whatever you're doing, there's an activity log here. So nobody has access to delete these logs, which basically means even your administrators, what if there is an insider threat, a security breach, wherein one of the legitimate user of the organization tries to do some illegitimate or anything which is beyond, which should not be done, any activity, then it will get logged here. And even the admin can't delete these logs. They can't modify the logs, they can't delete it. Only Tenable can delete the logs from the backend. And by default, you can see Tenable stores last 90 days of logs. So that's the last 90 days of logs that you can see in the portal. Beyond 90 days, you will not be able to see the logs. However, you can export those logs to another solutions. Like in Azure, we have Log Analytics Workspace, or any logging solution that you have, external logging solution. You can export those logs in that logging solution if you want to retain them beyond 90 days. Last 90 days of logs, it basically keeps into the portal. Any question on logging, activity logs?
So
So,
Raghu,
Raghu, more than, yeah, sorry, Sachin. Yeah, please go ahead.
no, that's fine. So Raghu, one quick question. So on these, all types of logs are collected, means all the activities, each and every activity, changes in policy, changes in scan frequency, everything, right?
Absolutely, everything. Even
Okay,
if you create a new scan, a log will get created. If you change the configuration of a scan, if there's a pre-configured scan, a scheduled scan, and you change the frequency of that scan, you change the asset criteria, anything that you make changes. So any modification event, any creation event, any update event, it logs. It does not log your moment. So for example, I'm moving from here and there in the portal, it will
okay,
not. But
okay,
other
got it.
than this, any changes that I'm doing, it is logging it.
Okay, and I can, as you mentioned, I can integrate this with any of the SIM tools just to have a kind of visibility of it.
Absolutely. So, for
Okay,
example, Sentinel has Tenable connector. So you can
okay,
directly configure that connector in Sentinel. There is a format that they use, which is known as CEF, Common
yeah, yeah,
Event.
yeah.
You will need to configure a CEF CEF
CF,
connector,
yeah.
and using the connector, you will be able to stream logs into Sentinel.
Okay,
Sentinel, Splunk, QRadar, Alert Logic, SecureOnyx, FireEye, any solution that you have.
got it. Okay, great. Thank you, Raghu. Sorry, Anuj. Yeah.
Yes, Anuj.
Yeah, I had the same question. Thank you.
Okay, great. So this is how we can. So this portion is very important. Right now we are focusing more on admin related configurations. So we'll go back. I'm say setting is all about admin configurations at the end of the day. Then comes language. Now over here, your user interface language is English. If I change this to Chinese and save it, probably doesn't allow me. Yeah, it allows me in Tenable. So now it's Chinese. Everywhere it's Chinese. So I will not take risk because I don't know Chinese. I will quickly change it back to English. Okay. So that's how you can change the language also. Chinese, Francis, probably French, and then this Chinese, Mandarin, whatever that language is. So that's user interface language. So depending on the geography of the user, they can change the language that they understand or that they are more comfortable with. Let's move on. Then comes export. As I said, export activity. It is storing the export activity. The default configuration was 2 days. So any data that you export will be shown here. it will be retained for 2 days. Now that you have configured it for 7 days, it will be retained for 7 days. So you can come back to this window and you can see, okay, this report that I exported, I need that report again. You can get that report here. That's export capability. Okay, then comes dashboard. Now this dashboard setting is also available here directly. You can see dashboard, all dashboard, new from template and widget library. So you can create a new dashboard from a template, and then you can also navigate to widget library. Widgets are nothing but but these boxes which contain certain information that you can select when you want to create dashboard. These are all widgets which are available. You can just pick and choose a widget and say, okay, I'm more interested in knowing CIS, CIS vulnerabilities or SQL 2019 database vulnerability. These are all widgets. You have so many widgets. To your left, you can see all the options, my widgets, new and updated widgets. So these widgets, you can combine these widgets into a dashboard and you can see what you are more interested in most of the time based on your roles and responsibilities. So that's about widgets. You can create a new custom widget and then you can just select the column. You can select the name and then you can select the widgets here and keep creating the dashboard. So when you explore this capability, you will understand more about it. However, this is the default dashboard that you have. So these are two dashboards, vulnerability management overview explore and explore overview. So we basically have both the dashboards as our default dashboard. So what you see right now is vulnerability management overview and the other dashboard, explore dashboard. This is our default dashboard basically. Okay, so till here we wanted to complete. Now, all of these things would start to make sense when we have our lab environment up and running. Then it would start to make sense, which is related to the rules, tagging, scanning, credentials, target groups, exclusions. We talk about it when we reach to that level. However, we can just talk about the last part. So we are done with all the settings, which all the general settings, these were all the I'm saying these were all account management settings. We are done with account management settings. Now we'll directly come to the bottom and we'll look at this integration. These are my integrations which are available in Tenable. So my first integration that Tenable provides is cloud connectors. Uh, if you have Tenable Cloud Security module, then this would make more sense because with this connector, you will be able to onboard cloud native services also. Right now, this connector would only bring virtual machines because with the vulnerability management module, you would only have access to virtual machines. In cloud, everything is virtual. So the servers that you provision in cloud, they are known as virtual machines. So with Cloud Connector, you can see when I click on Cloud Connectors, I have a Tenable. So I have already created one connector with Azure. Unfortunately, I lost access to Azure today, which is a known issue with Microsoft, wherein some of my participants in the day session, they lost access to their tenant one after another. And today it was my turn. I also lost access. So we'll connect with Microsoft and try and understand why this is happening. But right now you can see this is where we can create connectors. So you navigate to connectors dashboard. Give me a minute. All right. So we navigate to the connector dashboard and here we can click on create cloud connector. When I click on create cloud connector, look at all the connectors which are available. Now Tenable has been a mature and very old product. I would not say that this company came into existence in the last 5-7 years. It has been an old company and they are very mature when it comes to integrations, when it comes to vulnerability management, when it comes to uh, you know when it comes to the coverage from the coverage perspective. So Tenable provides you connectors for Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud Platform, AWS Heat setup. I'm saying this is both is AWS basically. And then from container security perspective, if you have container security scanner, Docker, AWS Elastic Container Registry, and JFrog Artifactory. So it provides you container. These are container services, containerized platforms. So you can create connection with these platforms because at the end of the day, containers also have vulnerabilities that you may want to scan. Or if you have your host in one of these three leading cloud service providers, which is Amazon, Microsoft Azure, and Google, you can directly create a connector. The connector with IBM and Alibaba Cloud is in roadmap. On 6th of this month, I actually attended a webinar from Tenable in which the product team, the PG group manager basically joined the webinar. He was one of the speaker in the webinar, and I asked him the same question that when are you bringing support for Alibaba, IBM, Oracle clouds? Because I have a couple of customers who are using Tenable, and at the same time they have host or virtual machines in Alibaba. They're using Oracle, they are using IBM, and they are not able to bring those assets into Tenable using connector because connectors are not available. So what they need to do, they need to go with manual approach of deploying agents on those assets so that the assets are reflecting into the Tenable vulnerability management. So from that perspective, I asked this question and he confirmed that it is there in the roadmap. And by mid of 2025, the connectors for IBM and Oracle Cloud will be available. For Alibaba, he did not give any tentative date. So Tenable is going to add those connectors also. Now, what is the benefit of these connectors? It directly say import data from various sources to further enrich Tenable.io. Tenable.io is the old name of Tenable Vulnerability Management. It used to be Tenable.io, then they renamed it to Tenable Vulnerability Management. Tenable.io was like a collection of multiple Tenable products. Then they separated those products and they created one product with the name vulnerability management. There was another product which was Tenable Security Center. There was another product that was Tenable Cloud Security. So they basically created multiple products, and now nobody says Tenable.io. However, their URL still says Tenable.io. You can see here cloud.tenable.com-tio. It's Tenable.io. So probably they will change this URL also in future. So that's Tenable connector that you can see here. Now here we can create connectors. So in what scenarios will I be using connectors? There are multiple methods through which I can bring data into Tenable. When I say data, I can bring my virtual machines, my network, my applications onboarded into Tenable solution so that I can discover vulnerabilities around those assets. So there are multiple methods. One of the method is cloud connectors. Now, most of you are from Qualys background. So in Qualys, you also have a Qualys module, which is Qualys Guard module. In Qualys Guard module, you have Qualys Cloud Connectors. If you click on Qualys Cloud Connectors, you will also notice that Qualys also provides you connectors for Microsoft Azure, Amazon Web Services, and Google Cloud. So you can configure those connectors, and with the help of those connectors, you can directly add all the virtual machines from those clouds. And since they are connectors, they also have visibility into other services like virtual networks, storage accounts, SQL databases, or additional services, depending, it differs from one cloud to another. So the same concept here, Tenable also have cloud connectors. And with the help of these connectors, I can actually bring all the data into Tenable. So for example, I'll give you a demo of how do I create an Azure cloud connector that if you want to understand. So let's say I want to build an Azure cloud connector. Now, before you build the connector, you need to be aware of the authentication mechanism. So we are talking about two different. So there are three methods. Let's say, where is my session transcript? So methods to bring in or onboard host. In Tenable, we call them host. They're also known as assets. At the end of the day, we're talking about virtual machines. So methods to bring in or onboard host into TVM, Tenable Vulnerability Management. There are three methods, three main methods that Tenable supports. The first method is Tenable Nessus Sensor, or we call it also scanner. The second method is Tenable Nessus Agent. The third method is Tenable Cloud Connector. These are the three methods. Using these three methods, you can basically discover host or you can onboard them into Tenable. If you want to connect it with Qualys, compare and correlate with Qualys. Qualys also has scanner appliances that you can basically depend. Now, Qualys has both hardware scanner appliance as well as software scanner appliance. Hardware scanner appliance, I don't think so now customers would use it anymore. Some, existing customers, old customers of Qualys are probably using it, but all new customers, they typically use scanner appliance, which is a virtual scanner appliance. So what is a virtual scanner appliance? It is nothing but a piece of software that you deploy on a virtual machine. And then with that software, you perform a network discovery and it will be able to discover, I'm saying credentialized scan, and it will be able to discover all the assets within that network. That's one option, you know, which is discovering vulnerabilities through scanner appliance. That's the first option here. This is the first option. Then the second option in Qualys is Qualys Cloud Agent. It has nothing to do with Qualys Cloud Connector, which is a separate concept. Qualys Cloud Agent. It's a small piece of software, a very small piece of software that you deploy directly on the host, on the asset, which does not require any credentials, similar to scanner appliance, and it can provide you in-depth analysis of vulnerability because it is locally installed or locally residing on the host. So obviously it would have more, more information or more in-depth. It would be able to run more in-depth scan and can provide you vulnerabilities, but more than what an external scanner appliance can provide, because it will be depending on port scan, it will be depending on ping, it will be depending on network protocols and credentials to access the system, right? So that's Qualys Cloud Agent. That's the second option. Then the third option that you have is Qualys Cloud Connector, which is Azure connector, AWS connector, GCP connector. So that's how you can compare and correlate Tenable with Qualys. Hope that is making sense, guys.
Raghuvi, I have one more questions. As you
Yeah,
said,
please.
this agent scan is better than scanner scan.
Yeah. See, it's not like agent scan is better than scanner scan. It is like which one is providing you more in-depth, uh, you know, vulnerabilities, or which can discover vulnerabilities, at the registry level, at the file level, which can provide more in-depth scan. That is agent, and it's logical. Agent is running locally on the system, while scanner is performing a network scan. It is trying to connect to the systems. It's an external scanner which is authenticate to the systems using the credentials that you have provided. So
Okay.
obviously, it would not be able to get into the depth of that system. It is not locally running on that system. While agent is locally running on the system, an agent can provide you near real-time vulnerabilities also, because agent is running 24 into 7 on the system, right? However, the scanner appliance that you have configured, it is configured to run a vulnerability scan based on certain schedule, probably every hour, or once in a day, or once in a week. So obviously, the level of depth and the level of visibility that an agent can provide cannot be matched with a sensor appliance or scanner appliance. That's the logic here.
Uh, uh, okay, but there is a one more thing, internal scan or external scan.
Mhm.
So I think scanner scan is internal plus external.
Yep. But that once again, I'm saying the same thing. You are talking about a scheduled scan. Scanner is not scanning the system 24 into 7.
Correct.
It is outside of the host. An agent is locally running inside the host. So it is actually scanning the system far more frequently. And anytime it captures a vulnerability, it will quickly report into the portal, in the management portal. But scanner would only report the vulnerability when the scan is running. That's the difference.
But data, who provide more data?
Agent, it will always provide you more in-depth analysis because it is locally running on the system. It
But
has
in term of external scan, this scanners can provide external scan data as well in combination of internal and external when we run the scan.
absolutely. So there are pros and cons. I actually have a presentation here. In my presentation, there is a specific slide that is not obviously for Qualys. It is from the Tenable perspective. That slide will basically give you the key difference between scanner and agent. Over here, you can see Nessus scanner pros and cons, and then Nessus Tenable agent pros and cons. And
Okay.
you can see the first limitation of agent is that Tenable Nessus agent are not designed to perform network checks. So certain plugin items cannot be checked if you only run agent scans, which basically means external, agent cannot run the port scan because it is sitting inside the system. So
Correct.
how it can identify the ports which are open on the system? That scanner appliance can run. So you have pros and cons. But when it comes to the choice, the organization, and it says Tenable recommends using whichever sensor best suits your environment and business requirements, which basically means that in some circumstances, customers should use both agent and network assessment for different types of systems and part of their network. So it's a combination. I would not say that you use scanner or you only use agent. The point that I'm trying to say that when it comes to finding vulnerabilities from a host related to the application related vulnerabilities or host related vulnerabilities, where network related vulnerabilities are the exception, an agent can
Okay.
always provide you more in-depth analysis.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So these are my three options that I was talking about. So these are my three options. Tenable Nessus sensor, which is a scanner, which is a kind of a scanner appliance, or a scanner software that you can deploy on a VM, or you can directly configure an appliance. Appliance is also a virtual machine which has the scanner software pre-configured. All you need to do is just provide some basic configuration, or you can deploy the sensor. You can basically download and install the scanner on an existing virtual machine, and then you can configure the scanner. So that's what scanner is. Then comes agent. Agent is similar. It's a piece of software. It's a lightweight software which does not take much resources from the system. You can directly deploy it on the host, and it provides you more in-depth analysis of the vulnerabilities on the host. And the third option is Tenable Cloud Connector. This is another. Now, these are options to onboard. I'm not talking about the scanning options. If I talk about the scanning options, then I will add one more to the list. Right now, I'm talking about the methods through which I can onboard assets into Tenable.
Okay.
Right? That's what I'm.
Yeah, so I had the same question actually because I was thinking that this is the solution for the vulnerability scanning, but yeah, you cleared it that this is only for the onboarding. So yeah,
On.
got it.
Right now,
Thank
we
you.
are
Yeah.
focused on onboarding,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
When we reach to the scanner part, I'm saying when we are done with onboarding all the assets, then we'll talk about scanning capabilities. That what are my scanning capabilities? So when
Yeah,
you
got it. Got.
put the scanning capabilities, you will add one more, which is Tenable
And
external scanners.
or called this unauthenticated scan.
Yeah, we also call them Tenable cloud scanners. External scanners. Tenable also provides external scanners, which are primarily meant for scanning external resources like web applications. If you have web applications that you want to scan from outside, to do outside in vulnerability analysis. So you've done inside out by running an agent scan, and then you want to do outside in vulnerability analysis, then we can use Tenable external cloud scanners. So that's another scanner. But right now, our focus is to understand the methods to bring onboard host into Tenable. That's the reason I'm not including this. So these are my three options. There are more, but they are Nessus specific product. Now, Tenable uses Nessus appliances, Nessus agent to scan, but Nessus also has its separate product line range, which is Nessus Manager, Nessus Expert, Nessus Professional, which is outside of the purview of this training, out of scope of this training. So you have more capabilities, but from Tenable perspective, as I said, methods to bring in onboard host assets into Tenable Vulnerability Management. These are my three options that I have. So I can either use a scanner, since Tenable Nessus scanner, I can use Tenable Nessus agent, or I can use Tenable Cloud Connector to bring in the to onboard or discover the assets into my network. So these are my three options.